watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Starting New Year's Day, Illinois becomes the 11th state in the nation to allow the sale of small amounts of legal recreational marijuana. That was a big political fight here in Springfield that highlighted much of 2019's debate and activity. But even now, there is a fight at the local level all across the state about where the product can be sold, where it cannot, and who gets to make money off of that in the process. Joining us now is House Democrat Carol Ammons from Urbana. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I remember there was an emotional moment from you during the floor debate back in May about this entire issue, and I wonder how closely have you watched and been a part of the rollout since to allow for the sale of legal recreational marijuana, but also to make sure that it lives up to its promise to repair the harms of the war on drugs and to try and create some new revenue stream or some new mechanism that helps affected communities, minority communities, African American communities profit from now this new industry. How well is that going, do you think, so far?
You know, I've not been a part of the official rollout, as you know, but I have been on the grassroots rollout, how communities are starting to see what's happening with the marijuana legislation that passed last session. My concern is this. I saw a bit of the conversation happening in the city of Chicago yesterday in their council chambers. There is a fundamental issue that is going to manifest itself come January 1. And one of those fundamental issues is that if we want to bring equity to the space, then we are starting at a point that is not equitable. Meaning, if you believe that existing medical dispensaries who will also get their recreational license on January 1 and providing for social equity applicants who are really not at the starting line, they're like 50 paces back, that is not going to create the equity. And I think what I saw in the argument in the city council chambers as I jumped in towards the end of that, right before the vote, was that communities of color who have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs are also going to experience somewhat of a significant delay. They don't have the investment dollars that are already in the medical space. They don't have a location. And so financing is going to be a real part of the problem that's going to continue to show the disparity between those who are owners now, which are all white, and those who are trying to find a way into the space. The fund that is going to be made available by way of those sales January 1, that's just not enough to open a dispensary. And so there's going to be some real disparities that come about.
I think it's $30 million. The fund hopes to reach $30 million of capital money that it can provide loans as seed money.
Absolutely, at some point.
That's not enough.
Oh, that's not enough. So we know a dispensary to really be operational is going to cost you $1.3 million upward. And so that loan is really going to be a small investment from the state where there's very little dollars available already in that economically disenfranchised community. And so we have some fixing that we're going to have to do come July of 2020. And once we look back, you know, I'm a supporter of completely legalization, right? We've not totally legalized in a way that I see legalization. Mm-hmm. So I'm a supporter of legalization, but I'm also a supporter of real equity being built into this program, and I don't see that as of yet.
Okay, interesting. So, put another way, it sounds like the Chicago Black Caucus was saying in City Council on Wednesday this week, essentially, in so many words, rich white guys who've already been making the money on medical for years have a significant head start.
Absolutely.
And everybody else has to wait a lot longer to hope for a chance that maybe if they get the right financing in the right area, that possibly they can catch up, but wait your turn.
So think about it like this. Right now, the medical space does not allow for a legitimate business to go into a bank and say, would you give me a loan to open up my business? Because federally, you can't do that, right? So there's some banking issues that happen in our community. So where are you going to get the investment dollars to really open up this space? You got to find some private investors. You got to find someone willing to take a chance on your idea, your dispensary, your plan. And that is harder than people realize. Mm. And so because I've seen this in other communities, I went to Drug Policy Alliance conference this year in St. Louis. This is not just Illinois. This is happening in California, in Colorado, in spaces that have been in this area much longer than we have, and yet equity still doesn't exist in those places. And so I think this is going to be a very long stretch in order for us to really see what's going on. I see it now. I would have done it a little differently. I would have said social equity applicants in DIA, meaning disproportionately impacted areas, we're going to release licenses to you with technical assistance on the front end. I'm going to have these medical people stay medical for the first 6 months. I would have done that differently.
You would have reversed the order.
I would have
made them wait.
Absolutely. I would have reversed the order. That's not what happened. We got what we have, and we'll see what happens.
Interesting. I wonder, though, how confident you are in this administration to still get there at some point over time. I'll give a few points of context. Representative John Gordon Booth said that this bill and the social equity pieces of it are about reparations. Those were her words. Christian Mitchell, the deputy governor, just this week said that this measure does create pathways, clear pathways through financing and in carving out these disproportionately impacted areas. He says this gives a real leg up, and to block or slow this down now would put that at risk. And that Governor Pritzker said it may not happen overnight, but we're going to get there at some point. How confident are you that they can actually achieve that goal, even if it takes a little while longer than you had hoped?
I hope that they're right. I hope that I'm being an eternal pessimist on this issue. I don't see the path as clearly as they do. I know what I've seen on the person-to-person level, those who are entrepreneurs who are trying to get into the space. I do know that there are lots of hurdles in doing so. I hope that they're right, and ultimately they will see the results that they expect to see in the coming years. Now, I will say to you and to the listeners of our community that the issue of economic parity is 400 years old as of August 2019, as we celebrated or commemorated the 400 years of sojourn of African Americans in the Americas. And so for us, as a community, we've not seen economic parity in any industry. And I don't believe that this is drafted in a way that will produce it. So I hope that I'm wrong in the next 6 months, that they will be right and their expectations will be reached.
Very interesting. Another example of how this hits home is that, for example, in Chicago, if you live in public housing, if you don't live in public housing, you live in your own home, you're totally legally allowed to consume small amounts, the legal amounts of marijuana there with no threat or danger of being arrested or facing any kind of punishment of any kind. In public housing, you can't. You could lose, there's all kinds of different ramifications there that could happen in public housing. Is that fair? And should the state do something to offer guidance to the local level? Should they leave it up to the locals to see how that should be enforced?
You know, I intend to draft a resolution for the spring session to Congress to address the issue in public housing. The problem with that is
the issue of marijuana.
The issue of marijuana, the problem of personal consumption, right? In my apartment, where I live, where I rent, in the house or whatever. These things, again, we talked before we started the show about the creation of homelessness. When you put rules in place like that, that denies a person the right to make decisions on their own in their own space, you also create a homelessness, especially in public housing. So if a person is getting subsidized housing already, and the item is supposed to be legal, why would they be in jeopardy of losing their subsidized housing because they either eat edibles or smoke? And I just really recently learned that a public housing tenant is randomly drug dropped to renew their public housing. This is problematic. And so I intend to write a resolution to the federal level to address this, that they need to look at this because states have the right to legalize, right? But they should not deny people housing based on the consumption of marijuana.
It's sort of the cruel irony that that's a right you would have had if you only had a little bit more money to afford
your own
house.
Home. That would be different.
That's an interesting.
But let's think about this. We subsidize lots of things in the United States. We subsidize farmers. We subsidize all kinds of things, and we don't take drug tests for people before they get their federal dollars. Mm-hmm. We should not do that in public housing.
Very interesting. That is certainly something that we will keep an eye on and watch moving into 2020. Another thing that is a very different topic, but that also is on the radar of the governor and of lawmakers in 2020 is ethics, how this legislature addresses the issue of lawmakers' behavior, especially when lawmakers are tempted to reach out and take a bite for themselves or try to use their power, parlay that into personal profit. We've seen that in a few different instances, some of them criminal, some of them maybe perhaps just unethical. One example in the Senate, Senator Patricia Van Pelt was pursuing the sort of smorgasbord of options that she was selling CBD oil. She was setting up sort of a pyramid scheme to sell these through churches and other ways, and then also offering to sell investment advice. You'd pay a ticket to go to her seminar. She'd say, I'm going to tell you which marijuana stocks are viable, which ones are profitable, to help your pursuit of becoming a, quote, marijuana millionaire. Was that the right thing for her to do there?
I mean, I think that, of course, all of those things that you just described are legal businesses that operate currently, right? The underlying question is whether legislators, in our case, we're full-time legislators according to the way we're drafted, but we're supposed to be full-time legislators in Illinois. Should legislators also maintain interests or business or jobs in other sectors that we regulate? That's the question. I think that will continue to be the question until we define truly what kind of operation we have going on in Springfield. I'm a full-time legislator. I don't work in any other facility. I don't hold any other interest in any other space. My attention is on the regulation in Illinois of all of these other industries. And I believe personally that it creates a problem for me if I work for the university and I'm a legislator here and I make all the rules that we have to follow according to higher education.
Because the public would have confusion about where your interests truly lie?
I think so. I think that, look, I learned through this whole last 5 months, I did not even know that we had current legislators that were also lobbyists. I didn't know that. And so only because of what has happened in the last few months did that become, oh, can we do that?
Right.
I don't believe that that's a good path. I think you'll see a lot of bills come up in the spring. I intend to have 2 of them myself to deal with some of these questions that are kind of in these gray areas.
Are you breaking news here? Can you give us any further details about what those bills contain?
I'm breaking news. I won't say what they are, but I tell you.
It's a tease then.
There will be 2 bills introduced by myself, and I'm sure other members will introduce other ethic reform bills. In the coming months, because that is a question of making sure the public knows where our interest lies.
One other question that comes up is that we look at, you mentioned that lawmakers are lobbyists. Part of that is because they're registered lobbyists in Chicago, even if they're lawyers who have to approach the city council about something like zoning or a permit. On behalf of their client, the city of Chicago's, believe it or not, their lobbying requirements are so stringent and so strict that they have to disclose that and how much they were paid. I don't know of any other city in Illinois that has those same lobbying registration requirements. In fact, most cities in Illinois, they have very, very weak lobbying registration standards. They don't have the size of government that the city of Chicago does. That creates sort of a patchwork of different local rules. So that who is lobbying local government when they go back home if their local government doesn't require them to call themselves a lobbyist, right? So
I think these are the things that need to be vetted. They need to be vetted out so that we can get rid of what I believe is just the churning of unethical decision-making that happens when you have separated interests. If my interests are protecting my client who's trying to zone for a particular business, and then I come and pass a bill to make that happen, I think that is what takes away the confidence of the public in its public officials. And we really need to address these issues and sort them out. In my ideal world, like some states do, you are a full-time legislator, that's what you are, you're a full-time legislator. If you need to make more money than we pay, then you might want to not be a full-time legislator.
Yeah, a lot of other jobs are in fields are hiring. So you mentioned something a minute ago that you saw certain actions as legal, but Governor Pritzker has recently said that lawmakers should be held to a higher standard, and that even those that come under federal investigation should be out of office. That's interesting. It seems he's not willing to offer full due process to a sitting lawmaker that comes under the scope of the federal government. How do you see that issue? And should lawmakers be held to a higher ethical standard than just the law? And what is the line for having to resign or leave office?
You know, I don't know if I have a really great answer for that. I do think that lawmakers who make the laws that govern the lives of the people of Illinois should have a higher standard, because we are the ones who can shape what people's experience will be like. I think that requires a higher standard, right? To whom much is given, much is required. That's a very basic biblical standard that we sometimes quote, but I think we should apply that thing to our policy work.
Very interesting. And contrary to popular belief, the golden rule is not he who has the gold makes the rule, although that is sometimes how it's practiced.
That seems to be what's happening, though,
It does
isn't
happen
it?
sometimes. Speaking about people with riches making rules, there is a political fight coming in 2020 about the progressive income tax that Governor Pritzker has campaigned on, that you and other Democrats have supported, and put that question to the voters on the ballot. I understand that House members cannot actively campaign for the issue because it's a constitutional question now. But what's at stake here? If the state doesn't get the progressive income tax, what would be the ramifications for our state's fiscal climate?
Oh, wow. If people want to just take a 2.5-year walk back, where we didn't have a budget and we couldn't provide basic services for our constituencies, you can multiply that. What we have right now is an opportunity before us to, make the tax system a bit fairer for those who have resources, really should be paying a lot more to help us sustain our responsibilities as a government, but also considering that if people in communities who are paying, the middle class and the lower wage earners are paying more money than even those who have the multi-million-dollar annual salaries, that don't seem quite right. So we will lose services at a rate that people felt slightly in 2.5 years ago, but we only have about maybe $39 billion, $40 billion, maybe marijuana will bring in a little bit more, but we have way more bills than that. And so our tax structure is unfair, it's not structured appropriately. We need to address that. This is one way to get the input from the public as to what they want to do constitutionally, and we'll see what the public says.
The argument from the opposition here is that voters will not trust Springfield with a, quote, blank check, or that you can't trust Springfield lawmakers. Under the cloud of the federal investigations that are going on, you can't send a big $3.5 billion in extra money to Springfield because who knows where it ends. That's the argument that they're cooking up now. There's going to have attack ads and all that. How do you counter that message?
I don't think that's a strong argument at all. People pay taxes every single day. We pay sales taxes, property taxes, taxes on cars, vehicles, excess. We have taxes coming into Springfield now that we have to met out to all of the programs and services that we provide for our communities. That money is necessary because the pension and our pensioners have earned their money and should actually get it. So we have to pay that pension debt. We were going in the right direction at one point. Under Quinn had gotten the pension debt down. We went up $17 billion in 2.5 years, 4 years with Ronner. That has to be corrected. And so if you don't think that you should send the tax dollars to Springfield, then that means you don't want the services that government has to provide to its constituencies.
To be fair, the decision that precipitated that nearly $17 billion backlog that happened under the Quinn administration. It was to allow the flat tax to go from 4.95 down to 3.75%.
Correct. So we've been playing this tax game for a very long time, and it is really time for what I really appreciated about what Governor Pritzker did was that he said, let's not play that tax game anymore. Let's tell the constituencies what's really happening, what the real cost of government is to provide services, child care services. I just got a call about child care yesterday. If a person can't work because they don't have appropriate child care, they don't earn enough to pay for child care, we're going to find ourselves in a worse situation than we were 2.5 years ago.
Interesting. Before we let you go, I know we're approaching the end of the year here. It's a time of transition, a time of looking forward and setting new goals and ambitions. I understand that the issue of housing is important to you, affordable housing. You mentioned that earlier. I believe there was a proposal here in the House. It didn't quite clear a committee in 2019, but it wasn't that long ago they were saying that about the $15 minimum wage, and now that's law. So that proposal would remove the ban on rent control. There's an idea in
They
some...
repeal the rent control legislation. Yeah.
Right now, state law says no local government can control the price of rent. Some progressive Democrats wanted to say, you know what, we need the local ability to control the price of rent. What do you think of that idea? And what is the issue? What motivates your opinions on that issue?
I think that the calls that come to my office, the veterans who have served this country, who are homeless in the streets, and we have to step in to find them stable housing. I believe wholeheartedly that we need to do something significant about the cost of rent in our communities. Without having some kind of regulation, some kind of control, people will end up on the streets. And we have, right now in Champaign County, myself and Senator Bennett work together to put some capital dollars for us to acquire a year-round shelter for families that find themselves in the streets. We don't have that shelter yet. And so, but we do have homeless families. We have homeless children at a rate that is unsustainable in communities. And so if people cannot afford their basic rent, and we are not helping in any way by way of government subsidies and things of that nature, we will increase homelessness at a rate that we've not seen before in our state. I think that is a issue of conscience for me when a veteran calls me and says that I have nowhere to go. After he has served his community, he has served his country, and yet we're not taking care of those who have. We have families and children who don't know where they're going to eat or lay their heads for that night, that we as a community should care about those families. I think that that bill may or may not be the answer, but what I do know is that we need to really study this issue in a way that reveals all of the ways homelessness is created and address those things by way of legislation.
At risk of oversimplifying this, and I don't believe the economics are the same, say in Cook County or in Chicago as they are in Champaign or Urbana, but couldn't one answer to homelessness be simply just more homes?
We have not seen a lot of, when I first moved to Champaign-Urbana, there was a wonderful program that was federally and state supported that helped first-time home buyers. So now we have very few of those programs right now in our community that would help first-time home buyers. We have some dollars, but not what I experienced when I first came to Champaign-Urbana. It was a great way for me and my new family, my new husband, to start off and purchase our first home. We've then transferred that home to our daughter. So that has to be a jump. Home ownership is the jump-off point for every single family to get to the middle class. And if we don't address home ownership, we have students graduating our universities that can't afford to buy a home. Why? Because tuition is eating up all their dollars. We have to address these issues fundamentally and put people in a place where they can actually be contributing people to our society by way of taxes and home ownership, and stability is part of that process. I look forward to working on those things.
And we look forward to covering that debate in 2020. Representative Carol Ammons.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We're back in just a moment.